With all the insights we've shared now, the first thing I'd say is don't wait till you're overwhelmed, because the amount of times I've ended up working with businesses and clients where they've hit that point where they are really, really struggling. It's simply because they just hadn't brought in the right expertise sooner and they just were hitting crisis points simply because too many things were going wrong. So don't wait till you're overwhelmed. Fractional talent lets you stay ahead of the curve. So leverage it sooner rather than later.
The best fractionals are looking 12, 18, 24 months ahead in your business. And you cannot get that from a consultant because they are not there long enough. And you won't get that from somebody who's never seen a recession or never scaled a business from 30 people to 100 people. So actually, people who are older than you or more experienced than you or have worked in bigger companies than you or have worked in a wider range of environments than you always want to hire people much better than you.
I see a fractional executive as not just an advisor. They step into your leadership team and take ownership of the outcome. So unlike consultants who provide recommendations or advisors who can produce beautiful reports, fractional leaders execute the strategy alongside you. So they are underpinning and driving results as much as they are advising and consulting.
Welcome to the Fractional Frontier, where we explore the future of leadership in today's evolving business landscape. I'm Charles McLachlan, here with Lorraine Carter, and every week we dive into the world of high-performing fractional executives and the businesses that leverage them.
Whether you're an experienced fractional leader or a business decision maker seeking top-tier talent, this is the place to be for actionable insights, strategies, and stories from the front lines of fractional leadership.
So today we're diving into a crucial topic for business leaders: how to decide when to hire a fractional executive and what kind of return on investment you should expect. So let's get straight into it. Why should business owners and decision makers care about fractional executives?
Well, business owners face a tricky balance. They need top-tier leadership to grow, but often can't afford or don't need a full-time C-suite hire. And fractional executives bring that high-level expertise on a part-time basis or project basis, giving companies the firepower they need to scale without the full-time cost.
Okay, so let's just go back to basics for a minute. What exactly is a fractional executive? How are they different from consultants or interims or even contractors or NEDs or board advisors? There's a whole alphabet soup out there of different things. How do you see a fractional executive?
I see a fractional executive as not just an advisor. They step into your leadership team and take ownership of the outcome. So unlike consultants who provide recommendations or advisors who can produce beautiful reports, fractional leaders execute the strategy alongside you. So they are underpinning and driving results as much as they are advising and consulting. So interim execs, they bridge that gap temporarily, but a fractional executive is a much longer term commitment, but a very flexible resource that you can flex up and down as you need. So in simplistic terms, a fractional executive gives that longer term commitment on a part-time basis, but gets deeply embedded in the business at a strategic level, but also at an implementation level. So it's facilitated leadership, it's developing strategy, it's knowledge transfer, and enabling the business to actually implement.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've noticed is that most interims are working full time, and often interims are as expensive as a full time or even more expensive than a full time executive.
Mm.
But also, interims tend to be there to either deal with something that's so messy that their job is done when they've cleared up enough mess for someone to come in for a permanent job, or they're just stepping in because somebody's stepped down and the next person doesn't get stepped up.
Mm.
So I completely agree. It's much more about some interims are temporary, whereas the fractional executives I work with, they experience this wonderful relationship with clients where the client sees them as part of the team. They
Yeah.
get invited to the Christmas party. They get
Mm.
invited to the company away day. They are half in and half out. So yeah, I can see there's a real difference between that and an interim or a
Mm.
consultant.
Mm. Mm.
But how have you come to develop your own views about when and why to hire a fractional executive, Lorraine?
I work as part of that fractional community. And sometimes that role is a lighter touch. Sometimes you are very involved in the business at a very intimate level. Um, so I've experience at bringing brand leadership to organizations, developing the strategy, and really rolling up the sleeves and implementing it. So whether it's like Thunder's Bakery in Dublin, build out the brand strategy, then you're working with them on a weekly basis to implement it. You're dealing with challenges and problems, you're finding solutions, and you're moving very fast all the time, leanly resourced business without a marketing team, but still got 150 people. And you are getting stuff done with accountability, and there's very much keeping an eye on the figures. So you're taking much more from that consulting role to implementing. And then there might be an element of, well, there are some very keen members on the team. They aren't marketeers, but we're going to operationally upskill them so they can do some of those jobs, which we've got really clear about where we want to get strategically. I'll do some of the implementation, but I'm also expanding the skill base with the knowledge transfer, mentoring those other members in the team to become very, very competent and effective part of the team for deployment and implementation. So that's my kind of experience. And to be honest with you, I love being involved at both a strategic and an operational level because you have a really deep understanding of the business. And like you already described, you're building relationships throughout the business and you have almost got the best of both worlds. So that's my kind of experience, whether it's been working with companies in Ireland, Greece, the UK, the US, Germany. It's a really dynamic and really stimulating and exciting way to work. So I guess when I reflect on some things, a good way of describing it is fractional talent is positioned as high impact leadership without that full time price tag. So, from your perspective, Charles, and your experience, how do you think fractional executives really create value beyond the traditional hires or outsourcing?
Yeah. So let's just start with outsourcing. I think the challenge for outsourcing, in my experience, and I work often with founder led businesses or businesses that are scaling up or scaling out. And there, outsourcing is of limited value to them because they aren't actually sophisticated buyers of the service. So I
Mm,
think outsourcing can make a lot of sense if you've got somebody mature enough in the organization to be an intelligent buyer.
mm,
Um, and then we've already talked about how traditional hires um, are much more expensive, but also in the community that I'm talking about, the scale up, scale out community, then often a full time traditional hire is not interested in stepping down
mm,
even if they're very well paid, into a smaller organization because reputationally, it feels like a step back
mhm,
rather than a step up.
mm,
So, what I've seen with the clients that I work with, where I'm often supporting the founder or the CEO, is that the fractionals, yes, they're good value because you're not paying for a full time person, but
mhm,
also they're in this really interesting liminal place where they bring the external perspective of multiple other clients that they're working with and a better understanding of the profession or the sector that they're operating in.
mhm.
They're also not bogged down by the company politics because they don't have a life or death relationship with the organization. They can
Yeah,
speak truth to power. Actually, if the CEO says on your bike, well, it's not the whole of their life that relies upon that relationship.
yeah.
Um, But also, I think they bring something to CEOs of these organizations who often have a single deep technical experience. So I can think of a particular organization I worked with, and the founder was a very, very brilliant technologist. And he
Mm,
was building a software as a service offer in an interesting market, has a very good view about it. But, you know, he wasn't a finance director, and yet he was looking after all the finance stuff. He wasn't an HR director, and yet he was trying to look after the staff where he had very significant staff turnover. Um,
mm,
but he was a great developer. And so when I started working with him, I said, look, first of all, I will be a fractional chair of your organization and run the board meetings so you can deal with your stakeholders. But also, let me bring in a fractional finance director so you don't have to worry about the numbers. And let me bring in a fractional HR director because you've got a horrendous turnover in
mm.
both your technical staff and in your sales and marketing people, which is really expensive.
Yeah.
Um, and he got huge value from that um, because actually previously he hadn't had a finance director. He'd had an accountant who was reporting quarterly in arrears and a
Mhm.
bookkeeper. Um, and he was constantly struggling with cash flow. The finance director came in and within 3 months had transformed the cash flow in the business. And actually, both of those fractionals supported him all the way through to a successful exit, um, which was very rewarding. In fact, he sold the business to one of his customers, which was quite interesting. Um, so, and I can think of another business which is a little bit earlier stage, but um, currently a technology consulting business. And again, introducing, while working with the two founders, introducing an HR person, a finance person, a product person, recently fundraising person, um, and probably will have an operations person and a CTO. But all of those people will be fractional. And having that full pack of full-time people probably would cost you 1.5 million a year to get the right people.
Yeah.
Um, they've got all of those people on a fractional basis and a very, very cost-effective outsourced finance function. So I think those are the things that have enabled both of those businesses to grow and succeed when actually without that kind of support, either the founders would have got burnt out or the business would have crashed.
I think that's really interesting for any of our listeners who are buyers or who haven't actually dipped their toe into engaging with the fractional executive market, and just for them to just think of a team at that leadership level with that many skilled people and none of them are full time, and to achieve those outcomes. That's a complete shift in mindset just to even think about that, and think about leveraging that capability and expertise and doing it on a much more lean but very effective basis.
Yeah, and the next person that they're bringing in is a part-time sales director. It's going to transform the way they do sales and account development and create a fresh key account strategy and so on. So it is extraordinary how these fractionals have leveraged a relatively small business
Mm,
run by an extremely gifted subject matter expert,
mm,
supported by a co-founder who previous experience was being a senior in charity operations.
mhm,
Um, and they've got flagship clients like HSBC
mm.
and ServiceNow. And they're up there, engaging at the top of their game in their specialist subject.
I think that's really reassuring. And then what's also really important for a potential decision maker to bring that kind of expertise on board is to consider, and I could probably expand on this a bit more, is because I bet one of the questions will be, well, it's not just cost effective, but how do you get that team working effectively together if they're not full time? But part of the beauty of working with fractionals is that is actually a skill set that every fractional needs to have, the ability to helicopter in and work with a team cohesively and very effectively even if you're not working with them on a full-time basis.
Yeah, and the irony is they're often more flexible about getting to meetings than full-time permanent people. Um, so it's getting that coordination to happen, yeah, can be much, much easier than if you've got, the CFO who is full-time, who's now looking after his finance department and the auditors and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Whereas a fractional, they can fit you in a way that's much, much easier than a full-time permanent head. But I
Yes.
suppose my question for you is, as you're out there, Lorraine,
Mm.
what do you see are the kinds of roles that businesses most commonly hire for?
Probably in my experience of actually working with other fractionals together with clients over potentially 2 to 3 years, those skill sets have often entailed, like some of the ones you've described. So, CFOs, obviously, my kind of expertise is filling that CMO role, but chief operational officers, you might have, I've even seen in the mix where you might have somebody who's chief of technology or digital. So those are the fraction roles that I see most frequently recurring uh, in SME businesses that are looking to drive, as you've described, scale up or scale out, uh, or to just run the business a lot more profitably and efficiently, because within the full-time team you just don't have enough of those skill sets. And all of those people that I've worked with, where we're all deep diving into the business, helicoptering fast, is everybody has that ability to work very fluidly and dynamic. They've got a lot of good people skills aside from their core subject matter expertise. And they're all very flexible and dynamic in terms of how they work. Because when you're moving and working with multiple different teams, you've just got to have those people skills.
Yeah. I think the other one I would mention, and this is often overlooked actually by buyers, is the fractional HR professional.
Yes.
Particularly if you're a knowledge-based business,
Yeah.
the everybody's been talking about the war for talent for about
Yeah.
20 years, but there really is a war out there, and increasingly you have to treat your staff as volunteers. You might pay them, but you have
Mm.
to treat them as volunteers. And attracting the best people, motivating the best people, engaging the best people, and retaining them, um, is something that many of the founders I meet and work with don't really understand the levers they can pull. And they just sort of assume, okay, I'll hire a good person, um, tell them to do a good job and let them get on with it. And
Mm.
that's quite an unusual mindset for individuals. I used to call it hire, forget, and fire, because
Mm.
they would bring these people in, not necessarily induct them, say, go and do it, and
Mm.
then forget about them. And then they'd come back 6, 9 months later and say, well, you haven't done a great job. You're out of here.
But isn't that one of the classics of why people leave, is just because they're not appreciated? They're not, or there just isn't enough uh, guidance around what the scope is of what they're to do. And that's particularly an issue in SMEs because there's often a lot of fluidity between roles, and people often wear multiple hats simply because you just don't have that level of individual specialization in a leaner business.
Yeah. And I think also some leaders are not very good at saying what success looks like. So they
Yes.
just sort of assume that you'll know what success look like. And these founders are very clear in their own minds about what success looks like, but they sort of imagine that there's some kind of, I don't know, Vulcan mind meld you can do where the other person will
Telepathic
understand what it is.
transfer of that understanding.
And then they're disappointed. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I
that's
wouldn't
always
ignore
one of the
HR.
first questions I ask is like, what does success look like from your perspective? And then you're looking at, well, how does that translate across everything else in the business? So,
Yeah.
one of the biggest questions that I think buyers might have, particularly if this is something new to them, is when is the right time to hire a fractional executive? And what are the key signs that a business is ready for fractional leadership?
Okay. Well, I talk to CEOs about two stages in their development as leaders.
Mm,
I say, as the founder of a business, you, in my view, are just a managing director because you probably are still taking responsibility for two, possibly three operational functions in the business. And to graduate to be a CEO, you should only have two roles. One is to be leader of the executive team, and the other
mm,
is to be the spokesperson externally to all the external stakeholders. So, in order to be the leader of an executive team, surprise, surprise, you need an executive team.
mm,
And what I see too often is founders getting caught and bogged down in the operational functional areas because they start out and they can only afford to hire somebody of manager grade. And
mm,
that person then needs a lot of um, shaping, forming, developing. And often the CEO doesn't really know how that person should do their job. So, to give you a concrete example,
mm,
um, again and again, I see CEOs who hire salespeople.
mhm,
And because they are salespeople, they do a fantastic job of persuading the CEO that they're great salesmen. But those salespeople may not be disciplined in how they do the selling. They may not deliver. It takes 6 to 9 months to work out they're not doing anything. Now, what do you do? Well, you go and get another sales manager, possibly,
mm,
or you think, I win all the sales anyway, so let's forget about it.
mm,
Or you say to yourself, okay, I need a sales director. So, but I can't afford a sales director with on target earnings of 250,000 a year. I'll get a sales director, who's happy with a 70 or 90,000 pound basic. And then they're disappointed because that person really isn't up to it.
mm,
If they would get a fractional sales director, or even better, a fractional chief revenue officer who looks after coordinating sales and marketing, then person would make sure that both the salespeople and the marketing people are delivering, but they would be coming in without a number on their heads. They're not going to be having on target earnings based around bonus. They're
mm,
getting a good monthly retainer, and each month the CEOs can see whether they're making progress or not. Um, and again, I've seen businesses get to the stage where they want to hire a sales team, and the CEO has no competence in hiring or motivating or rewarding a sales team. So that would be one simple example of, okay, I've got this HR manager or this sales manager or this marketing manager, but I'm spending too much time trying to get the best out of them. Let's get an expert in who really understands, got 20 or 30 years experience of running a marketing function or a sales function, and get that person in. And then I can get on with doing what I need to do, which is leading the executive team and being that uh, contact for all those external stakeholders.
and I've actually come across that problem in the sales function as well with clients, where exactly what you've described. You just don't have somebody with real strength and capability. They're on full time and they're really not achieving any of the targets, objectives, and they don't actually have the capability to do much beyond their remit because they're average.
Yeah. So we started this conversation talking about full-time consultant or fractional.
Mm.
Um, when would you say that actually a consultant is the right answer or a full-time executive is the right answer um, versus a fractional? What's the tipping point around that sort of triangle of different roles?
So, if the need is strategic and ongoing, and you can't afford a full time higher, then fractional is a sweet spot. But if you've grown to that level where you actually need that full time base and you have the financial basis and you actually have the wherewithal at the stage of growth within the business, then you're at the stage where it makes sense for full time hire. And consultants typically give advice, it can be all great advice, but they don't stay and they don't like to execute. And I'm hearing this amongst peers who are not fractional executives. They're great consultants. They're very knowledgeable. But I've heard on more than one occasion is I do not want to get involved operationally or implementation. I'll give the strategic input, but that's as far as I want to go with it. Um, and if you just want that input, but you have the capability to run with what is going to be given to you from that consultant basis, well, then that is fit for purpose. But if you want help and you need help to execute effectively, then that's where your fractional comes in. Because I've seen plenty of occasions whereby, the business thinks they have the capability to execute, but they don't, and they don't get the results they need. And if they had retained a fractional expert within that particular domain, they would have performed a lot better.
I would just add a further caveat about consultants. I used to be one, I'm ashamed to say, but there is an issue, I think, for many leaders of scale ups and scale outs, which is they don't really know enough to be able to decide whether the consultant really is expert enough to give them the right advice.
Yes.
Um, and particularly at the smaller level, there are a lot of people who have been generalists and then restyle themselves as consultants. And actually, they don't necessarily have the deep expertise that you really want from a consultant. Um, and that is quite a high risk. You know, because I'm running a business, I'm constantly looking for people who can help me with my sales process. And there are lots and lots of consultants out there who promise they're going to generate lots of leads for me and help close deals for me.
Mm.
But it's really difficult for me to find people who are actually going to deliver. And I talk to other people in running small businesses and they bring consultants in to do stuff for them. And 3, 6 months later, they're disappointed that actually it hasn't shifted the dial at all.
And that's a very fair observation because I can quote quite a few clients, more than a few, where that's when they've reached out to me. They've done exactly that. They didn't know enough to hire. Uh, they did bring on board consultants, and 3 to 6 months later, they'd nothing to show for it. In fact, they'd lost money. So they've ended up with a bigger set of problems because they were oversold and they didn't know enough to really evaluate could somebody bring that rigor and capability to the business to drive the necessary growth. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah,
And
yeah,
there's one other issue, I think, which is smaller businesses often have very little discretionary time to make change.
yeah.
Typical mindset of a consultant is I will come in, find all the problems, give you all the answers. But the smaller organization cannot digest all those answers and cannot implement them all, even if the consultant gives them a bit of support, because they just don't have enough time.
Mm,
So an ongoing incremental
mm,
step by step relationship with somebody who has been there, done it multiple times, but they're going to support that implementation
mm.
enables the organization to evolve at a pace that suits it.
And you've summed that up really well because often I've come into working with organizations where we'll go, well, yeah, if we're looking at the brand strategy, we've got clarity around the baseline, we've evaluated where things are at now. In real terms, you need these 10 items, but in order for the business to cope so it's not overwhelmed and you actually shift the dial, we'll address these first 5 things. And we will then address the other ones organically when we hit those key milestones, because otherwise you're just trying to bite off too much at one go. So it's like deal with the stuff that's the absolute musts and then add on the nice to haves and the less essentials as you go and then you can sustain the resources needed and the growth and it's not overwhelming. And you still have this steep growth trajectory, but it's no longer completely challenging everybody to the point where they actually just don't get anything done. So, Charles, can you share an example of a company that perhaps waited too long and what that delay actually costs them. What should businesses actually do to avoid poor timing if they're considering working with a
I
professional?
think, I mean, I'm a little bit conflicted about this because when I'm working with CEOs, I can see the benefit they would get
Mhm.
by getting somebody in sooner rather than later. All
Mm.
they can see is the cost and
Yeah.
the cash going out the door.
Mm.
Um, but let me give you a specific example. So there's an organization I worked with for 6 or 7 years,
Mhm.
and they never hired a fractional sales director. Um, they had sales managers, but they never hired a fractional sales director.
Mm.
Um, and they never hired what I think they should have done was rather than as fractional sales director, a chief revenue officer who would make sure that the sales and marketing functions were connected and worked effectively together. Now, that meant that the sales manager they had, um, first of all, they brought in 3 or 4 duds. And for a long period of time, the CEO was really the only person who closed any deals.
Mm.
The sales manager they got was not prepared to be disciplined in running the sales model, and um, ended up all the big accounts still had to be closed by the CEO, although he did do some of the preliminary work. Um, and I would say that held the business back probably about 3 years
Wow.
in terms of the time it took for them to get to exit. The only point at which they really got robust sales processes was when the person who came in to advise them on the exit basically shook everything up and
Mm.
had a very big drive to maximize sales in the last 6 months before the deal closed.
Yeah.
And they pulled out all the stops. And, he was on those people's backs day in, day out, acting as the sales director they should always have had to close
Yeah.
all the business that was sitting in the pipeline and hadn't really been closed. So I think that was very expensive. I think he got much less of evaluation than he could have done. And it took him, as I say, 3 years to get there, because actually it took them much, much longer to deliver the EBITDA, which would make them purchase ready.
Yeah. And that will be heartbreaking. I'm sure there's more than a few listeners that might relate to some of what you've shared there.
But what do you see as the issues that buyers have in identifying both the right role and the best person for that role, from your experience, Lorraine?
Well, it's never just about uh, the subject matter expertise. It depends on as much as what the business needs and the point of time at what it needs that. But it's also about the level of experience that professional has and the capability of being strategic, but being able to helicopter in, really implement if needed, corral resources, the flexibility and the people skills to work with a dynamic team they're not working with full time or even with other fractionals that might be brought in to get the job done and to get the results needed. So it's really a mixture of experience, skills, and the right personality type, and that really dynamic flexibility to work efficiently. Those are kind of your minimum prerequisites. And then, of course, there's just the culture fit. Is that individual going to get on with the key decision maker? And that's your starting point, your baseline.
And I would say, sometimes the fractional executive is the wrong answer because the leader who's engaging that fractional is so used to owning a full-time person
Mhm.
that they draw them into doing stuff that really they should have a more junior person doing,
Yeah.
or actually they don't understand how to make the best use of the time the fractional is offering, um, or they aren't prepared to resource the rest of the team that the fractional can leverage. And so I think buyers can shoot themselves in the foot. There is another problem, I think, and that is that some fractional executives imagine that they can operate as though they were a full-time person, where
Mm.
they are leading from position and it's all command and control. When the reality is, if you're fractional, you have to lead primarily through influence, through
Yeah.
mentoring, through coaching,
Yeah.
um, through engaging with other stakeholders in the business,
Yeah.
and do it because I say so just will not work.
I think there's very few work environments where that will work now any longer, or at least it won't have a healthy culture if it does. But you're absolutely right. It absolutely is a mixture of strategic implementation, but there's a huge mentoring and support function in there at all levels.
So let's talk ROI, return on investment.
Mm.
You know, a really good fractional should be charging you between £3,000 and £5,000 a month in the UK, perhaps a bit more.
Mhm.
Um, so, it's not nothing. How soon would you expect to see results, and how can you start to measure that return on the investment?
Well, I think it depends on the role and it depends on things like the immediate cash flow, the function that you're bringing into the business. Where is the current baseline? Um, because then the average ROI is a multiple of that investment. So, yes, businesses can see a 3 to 5 return, but certainly when I'm talking about working with a business with brand strategy and you're looking at where they currently sit, it depending on how much work you've got to get that into good shape and to get it actually implemented effectively. But realistically, you could easily be seeing 9 to 12 months before you actually are going to start seeing some serious traction and and return on your investment. But if you already have a reasonable baseline, then it'll be faster. But you're looking to accelerate growth over a 9 to 18 month period.
Yeah, well, I can see how marketing might take longer because that's, further up the pipeline, if you like. But
Mm,
even then, I've seen marketing people come in and no, they may not be generating a lot of revenue quickly, but
mm,
often they are making massive costs savings because actually the marketing spend was in the wrong place with the wrong people doing the wrong stuff.
yeah.
And often marketing spend is owned by multiple people
Mm,
who back their own hobby horses and there's no coordination. Or they've engaged so-called agencies where actually they're not sophisticated full function agencies. They do one thing really well, like Google
mm,
AdWords or something, and so they
mm,
bet their whole business on Google AdWords.
mm,
Um, so I think that's ways of really bringing cost savings.
mm,
I always say that yes, it's about increasing revenue. Yes, it's
mm.
about reducing cost. But the other aspect of this, which massively impacts shareholder value, is better managing risk.
Yes.
And if somebody's going to invest in a business, or if you're going to sell your business, or you're going to float your business, actually the valuation will be a multiple of your profitability typically. And that
Mhm,
multiple is driven by the risk perspective that the investor has. So I think bringing down risk, making things more predictable, more controllable is huge amount of value. You can double the profit. That's great. If you get better risk, then you can increase your multiple from 3 to 7 or 8, um, which is much more than double.
absolutely. And that all comes back to getting clear around where that baseline is of what you're coming in that particular role or function so that you can go, well, we have clarity of where things are now. And exactly as you've identified, I've come in and asked the question. So you're spending this much over here, but what's it actually doing for you? But the other key elements that you need are this, this, and this, they're missing. So they've been sold something which might be exactly as you've described, Google AdWords or an SEO function, but it's missing all the other elements like, well, what was the strategic rationale or the brand strategy behind that? Uh, so you're missing a piece of the equation, and then there's a big spend there, but they're missing all the other parts. So I think you've given that a great explanation. So some decision makers worry that fractional leaders won't be invested enough in the business, like a full time exec. So, how would you tackle that mindset?
Well, I suppose the classic consultant answer is let's get some KPIs in there, let's get some metrics,
Mm,
let's track them, hold them accountable.
mm,
Um, and I think there's reason for that. Um, you have to accept that there are a lot of things that are outside their control.
mm,
But I would always challenge a fractional. Okay, so what are you trying to achieve? Um, and I would have three kinds of things that I would be holding them accountable to. One is, if you like, deliverables. Now we've got a marketing plan. Now we've got a brand profile, or now we've got a cash flow forecast, or now we've got a new sales model, or whatever. So there's deliverables.
mhm,
The second thing is short-term wins. So that's where you're seeing in the short term income or cost shifts. Um, and then longer term, I think they should be setting out how they're going to bring value to the business,
mhm,
and you should hold them accountable to that. Always recognizing that they may rely on other people in the organization. So you as CEO also have to take responsibility for ensuring that other executives or other stakeholders release the resources that are necessary for them to succeed. But I do think you need to hold them accountable. And when I talk to fractional executives, I say to them, you may only be there, 2 or 3 days a month. You've got to show people month in, month out that for
mm.
that monthly fee, you are delivering value. So you almost need to offer your own tracker of how you're making that change. And
Yeah.
the temptation for the CEO is once they've made a change, they sort of bank it,
Mm,
and they forget that, how difficult things were before the person came.
mm.
Um, and so the fractional needs to demonstrate value month in, month out.
Yeah, and it's very easy to get so caught up in with getting things done that you forget to do that. So it's really important to keep people informed. Yeah, this is where we're at. This is what's happening. Though this is why we're doing it, and this is the outcomes, and this is what our key milestones are along the way to achieving those objectives. So, what do you think are the most common misconceptions buyers have about fractional execs and how they avoid falling into those traps?
I think the most difficult thing for buyers is to shift their mindset from unless I own 100% of this person,
Mm,
then actually they're not really working for me.
mm,
Um, And in some ways, that has been reinforced by COVID and remote working, where they're even more fearful that if the person's not there in their site, you know, 15 hours a day, then how could they probably be working? So I
mm,
think that's the big fear. How get them to do that, go that extra mile, do that extra stuff. And the truth is, you won't be able to. And that's a discipline in itself.
mm,
For the CEO, that's a discipline in itself. They will do the things that most matter, that will make the most impact, and they will make sure that those other things are being done by other people. And so you don't now hire a 200,000 a year CFO and they sit down making sure the management accounts are produced on time.
yeah,
Um, when really their true value is reducing the costs of your funds, ensuring that your cash flow is being actively managed, and preparing for the next funding round. That's where they get value. Um, so I think that's the biggest misconception. I think they think, well, I need to treat this person as a full time person, and they're not full time, but I'll just really squeeze them to
mm,
deliver. It can feel expensive because you may perceive you're not getting very much time. Um, So, if you're spending 5,000 a month on somebody, um, and you think they're doing, I don't know, 2, 3, possibly 4 days a month, that can feel like a lot of money.
mm.
But the truth is they are probably thinking about your business every single day.
Oh,
So you've got
absolutely.
got a lot of mind share from them.
Mm.
I don't know how you experience it, Lorraine, but
Oh, totally. I agree with that. Yeah, you're not. It's not when you're interacting with or physically with them or interacting online. It's definitely the mind space that goes outside of that time. That is
And it's not
hugely
like they're
valuable.
on the clock charging you in 6-minute increments, like some other professions we could mention. So when they turn up and do something,
Mm,
you know that not only are they bringing 20 or 30 years experience, but also they've been thinking about what matters for your business. And they've also been thinking about what they learned in the other 4 or 5 clients that they're talking to,
yeah.
and working with, and the other fractional professionals that they're engaging with. So you've got a much richer ecosystem that they can
Mm,
bring to bear.
mm. I mean, I'm even reflecting on a conversation I had with somebody this week, and she was mentioning a professional with brand strategy skills that only worked in one sector. And I said, have you considered the risk of that bubble? Because if you're not working across other sectors, markets, domains, jurisdictions, that's very high risk because it's so important to be looking outside just your own core sector because there's huge learnings aside from trends and what might be happening in your because it could very easily be sideswiped without even realizing it.
Yeah. So let's just imagine that I'm a CEO of a scale up business. I'm hearing all of this fractional stuff being buzzed around. And I'm thinking of hiring a fractional executive.
Hmm.
What's the first step you'd recommend they take, Lorraine?
I think the first thing they need to get clear on is what's the outcome they want to achieve. It's not about the title, it's about what is the outcome. And then look at, well, who do you actually need to help you achieve that outcome and break it down into bite-sized chunks. And that then helps you get clarity around, right, okay, this is the primary outcome and these are the other two things behind it. So who do I need to help me get there? And there's quite likely definitely areas of that just are outside your domain. You've kind of got a general notion about it, but it's not your core expertise. You've got really strong technical strengths elsewhere. So define that outcome. Is it, for example, like you really need much stronger brand differentiation or a premium position to drive that revenue growth? Or do you need to change things and improve things operationally? Or are you fundraising? Once you have clarity around that goal, then finding the right talent becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Start with the end in mind.
Exactly. It's always about looking right, reverse engineer. This is what we want. How are we going to get there? So, what do you think Charles buyers should look for during that hiring process to ensure they're getting the right fit beyond just the resume and the professional profile?
Yeah, I think there's 3 things that I'd always be looking for.
Mm.
I think curiosity is really important.
Mhm.
Um, because if they're not curious, then the risk is they'll just come with their pat template answers, and you'll get very frustrated because you feel you're not being listened to and not being understood. So curiosity is crucial.
Yeah.
Um, the second thing is, have they been able to shift out of the consultant mindset? There are quite a lot of consultants who want to slip into fractional roles. The temptation of consultants is to avoid the implementation. The
Mm.
temptation of the consultants is just to bring expertise and not
Mhm.
provide that support and mentoring. So
Mhm.
have they stepped away from that consulting piece?
Yeah.
Or if they're coming into a fractional role from a full-time salaried position, maybe a very senior one,
Mhm.
um, are they ready to engage in an environment where they don't have the same level of support system that they might have had in a big corporate? Now, with the
Yeah.
best will in the world, they'll turn up and they might have 2 or 3 people in their team rather than, an international team of 30 or 40 people. I remember a finance director I worked with. He was used to having 26 people in his team, all in one place. Um, and then he comes into a business and they've got a part-time bookkeeper. Well, he had to make a big shift in his thinking, to engage in that world. So, and then the final thing is, do you actually like them?
Yeah.
Um, if you don't like them, then don't
Never.
bother, you know?
Yeah.
And if you don't like them, they probably won't like you. Getting that chemistry right really matters because, a fractional is not just for Christmas. You want to have somebody who's going to walk with you for the next 3 to 5 years. And yeah, I would just say, if you don't like them or they don't like you, cut your losses.
Oh, yeah. Don't waste any more time.
So, what would be your one key takeaway for a SME leader considering fractional talent, Lorraine?
Well, with all the insights we've shared now, the first thing I'd say is don't wait till you're overwhelmed because the amount of times I've ended up working with businesses and clients where they've hit that point where they are really, really struggling, it's simply because they just hadn't brought in the right expertise sooner and they just were hitting crisis points simply because too many things were going wrong. So don't wait till you're overwhelmed. Fractional talent lets you stay ahead of the curve. So leverage it sooner rather than later. What do you think one of the mistakes are that buyers should actually avoid, Charles?
I think it's very easy to look at the price and think, wow, that person is earning this much per day. Then say, I don't want to pay that amount.
Yeah.
I'll hire somebody cheaper, more junior, less experienced. And I would say that's a big mistake. Actually, it's the experience they've got is priceless. There's a lot of intangible stuff they'll bring.
Mhm.
The best fractionals are looking 12, 18, 24 months ahead in your business. And if
Mhm.
you're a founder, you've never run a business like this before. So, you don't know what's over the horizon, but they can see it and they can help to prepare you for it so that when it arrives, you're ready for it. And you cannot get that from a consultant because they are not there long enough. And you won't get that from somebody who's never seen a recession or never scaled a business from 30 people to 100 people. You just won't get that. So actually, people who are older than you or more experienced than you or have worked in bigger companies than you or have worked in a wider range of environments than you always want to hire people much better than you.
Mm. I think you made a really important point there about who are older than you, because I even was asked that question recently. And I said, of course it's not a concern, and he said, yeah, I didn't think it was, but I thought I just need to ask it. So I
Wow.
think I think we have probably shared a lot of different points for potential buyers to think about.
Yeah. And we've got somebody lined up in a future podcast who's actually hired a series of fractionals in a scale up business. So look forward to seeing whether their view of the world has anything to do with our view of the world, Lorraine. But that's
I
it for today. So thank you for joining us for this episode of the Fractional Frontier. We hope you found the conversation insightful.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn for more exclusive content and catch the edited episode on all major platforms. And don't forget to subscribe. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, leave us a review, share, or comment, or even share the episode with your network.
So thanks for exploring the Fractional Frontier with us, where leadership knows no boundaries.